So just how much are the Democrats friends with the Communist Chinese? Joining me now to discuss is Eric Eggers from the Government Accountability Institute. Eric, thanks for coming on. You've worked with Peter Schweizer in investigating some of the foreign influence and its role in the 2024 campaign. What have you found out?
Yeah, it's a great thing that you're pointing out, Ivory, and congratulations on your new show. I'm sure it'll be a massive hit, especially if you keep covering stories like this that matter to the American people and the future of our democracy. You mentioned the aide to New York's governors, and she was paid kind of by these like ornately decorated and kind of fancy ducks. And for that, she was able to keep meetings with Taiwanese officials from happening with New York State officials. So if you can get official meetings not to happen for poultry, what do you think you get if you're China, if you give $31 million to the son of the vice president and the son of the current president, right? He was vice president when they were paying him. I think the answer is quite a bit. China has expected to have this philosophy known as elite capture, and they've been very successful at executing it. And now that Joe Biden is no longer on the ticket, here comes Tim Walz. I think it's interesting, Ivory, that this is the first time in 50 years that we have an election without a Bush, a Clinton, or a Biden on the ticket. And yet the person that was picked to replace Joe Biden is someone who has a 30-year history with China, someone who has, as governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz oversaw the pushing of $900 million worth of Minnesota state taxpayer funds into Chinese funds through Minnesota State Pension Program. So I think the Chinese ties only get stronger even as Joe Biden disappears from the public spotlight.
So it's interesting when you look at the media landscape of America right now that the left-wing media is saying that Russia is infiltrating the right. The right-wing media says that China is infiltrating the left. When you look widen out the lens, you realize China and Russia are best friends. Does it really matter? What is your perspective on the threat of Russia as well as China?
So I think the Chinese threat's very real. You've had FBI directors say that the threat that Chinese espionage poses is the largest threat facing democracy in the West, and that's something that they've admitted for some time. And this goes back to, it's $31 million, by the way, to the Biden family with direct ties to the Chinese espionage complex. But that's after they gave Hunter Biden access to a $1.5 billion venture capital deal, the first of its kind. So, China has been courting the Biden family for a while. As it relates to Russia, this is an old playbook, but unfortunately, it's one that's proven to be very effective. Ivy, I think there's a very strong case to be made that Joe Biden wouldn't even be president if it weren't for the false claims of Russian disinformation because of Hunter Biden's laptop. When Joe Biden was running this summer, the number one key indicator of whether or not he was going to beat Donald Trump was if voters in swing states felt that Joe Biden personally profited off of Hunter Biden's business deals. That information is on the laptop. It's been proven. It's been vetted. Now, it's been reported on programs like yours and on networks like this one. So this is a real thing. And the reason why it was kept out of the public sphere 4 years ago is because Twitter and Facebook were pressured by the FBI and Department of Justice to say, well, we think this is Russian disinformation. We now know that's not true. Yet that information was kept. It was actively censored from the American people. And I think the election swung as a result of it. You talk about foreign election interference. That's the kind of election interference I think matters. It came from within the House.
But now that that information has been uncensored, I think a lot of Americans still don't grasp, okay, how does the president's son's business shenanigans, how do they apply to me? Okay, so he sold political influence. Does that impact my life and my family's life? I think a lot of Americans are not getting that connection. So what would you say to those people?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Ivory, and I think it's a really important point to raise. At the end of the day, why do we elect a leader of the country? We want somebody to look out for us. And I think what it raises is the question of, are decisions being made for what's in the best interest of the American people? Are decisions being made for what's best interest of our national security? Or are decisions being clouded and colored by other influences? There's a reason, Ivory, that we don't allow foreign entities to contribute to American political campaigns, because we want people to make decisions for the best interest of this country. Yet when you have foreign sources of money going to influence campaigns in any way, shape, or form, it's not okay. It's what the founding fathers fought to protect against, And it's what, unfortunately, I think corrupt political families are finding a way to backdoor access to, right? So, I mean, take a look at, just go back to the Minnesota state capitol and the money they're spending on their pension program, for example. Right? Is that what's in the best interest of Minnesota taxpayers? Or is Tim Walz helping make that decision because ideologically he's aligned with China? You mentioned that he honeymooned in Tiananmen Square. Tim Walz's wedding anniversary is on the anniversary of Tiananmen Square. He picked that on purpose. This guy is very ideologically aligned with communist China. And I think that people deserve to know, right, when you peel back the curtain, why are people making decisions? I think with Tim Walz, it's ideological. With the Bidens, it was financial. And I think it's fair to ask, are decisions being made for something other than what's in the best interest of American people? That's why it matters.
All right. So you wrote a book on the infiltration of our own elections. How does this all tie into whether the American people's vote counts in November?
Yeah, and that's a great question. Thank you for asking. I wrote a book called Fraud, How the Left Plans to Steal the Next Election, that came out in 2018. That was before we radically changed the way we cast ballots because of COVID. And I think, and honestly, I think it made the American election much less secure, much less accurate, despite what we were told by social media services at that time. What I'm more worried about in terms of the accuracy of electoral outcomes is not threats from Russia, threats from China, threats from Turkey. I'm worried about the way that the Biden administration, through executive order, is leveraging the federal government to basically perform a get-out-the-vote operation to boost its own political chances in the name of election outreach. There was just a story that people are targeting voters in the name of nonpartisan political outreach based on Facebook preferences. I think the Biden administration is going after what should be Democrat voters. They're leveraging the housing, urban development. They're leveraging the Department of Education to register voters on college campuses. They're using people that are on welfare benefits to try to get information through the Department of Agriculture. So I think things that are tipping their fingers on the scale. I mean, think about this, Ivory. They changed the dang candidate for president without them getting any votes cast. So I think when it comes to like how are the elections being manipulated, we're seeing it before our very eyes.
Yeah, it's interesting. We shall see what happens. Eric Eggers, great having you on. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Ivory. My pleasure.